guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I have my June wrap up. So June has 100% been my worst reading month of the year, not in the amount of books read because I read 9 books, but in the total pages, which is 600 less than the month that was previously my worst month, which is April. So June was also just generally the worst month of the year. So far, my cat Hamilton was seriously injured, which resulted in lots of different vet visits. He was referred to a specialist for really like intense and extensive surgery, which he is now currently recovering from. And at the point that I'm filming this, he still has to go back to that specialist for further surgery. So my anxiety was high. They wanted us to, or they told us that we may need to consider having him put to sleep multiple times throughout this. So it was just a really big stressful anxiety month, and for that reason I definitely wasn't prioritizing reading and I did not get that much read. Now, as I said, I did read 9 books in total. The reason for this is that right at the beginning of the month, because I was participating and co-hosting whatever-thon created by Maddie at Book Browsing Blog, I read all of the smallest books on my TBR right at the beginning of the month to give myself a little bit of a head start on that, and then from that it just like went completely downhill. So before we get into the reviews, we will of course start off with the stats, and in the month of June I read a total of 2,436 pages, which breaks down to an average of 81 pages per day. My average is normally at least 100, so we can see where we just weren't reading this month. For the star ratings, I had 1 2-star read, 2 3-star reads, 5 4-star reads, and 1 5-star read, which broke down to an average of 3.66 per book, which is slightly lower than normal, but nothing like super dramatic. For the demographics, I read 3 young adult, 1 new adult, and 5 adult books. For the formats, we had 3 standardly formatted physical novels, 2 comics, 2 novellas, 1 audiobook, and 1 e-arc. For the genres, we had 5 fantasy, 1 fantasy romance, 1 contemporary, 1 romance, and 1 paranormal. And for the places where I sourced these books from, 5 of them I have hauled in 2021. 3 of them were from my own TBR that existed prior to the start of 2021, and 1 of them was sent to me by the author for review. So cracking on with those reviews, the first one I really do not have too much to say about it, and that is The Legend of the Gold Raven by Kay Ancrum. This is a 40-page novella that goes with The Wicker King, which was the last book that I read in the month of May. I was interested in reading this. I'd heard like not great things about it, and it's like just a little extra thing but really not necessary, but I thought that if I was going to read it at any time it would be directly after The Wicker King. So I blasted through this in like less than an hour. The Wicker King is a young adult contemporary with a little bit of an ambiguous fantasy twist. It also has thriller elements, but we are following 2 boys called Jack and August who have been friends for the longest time, their entire lives. One of them's a bit of an outcast, one of them's really popular, but their childhood friendship still remains strong. So when Jack starts to have increasingly more vivid hallucinations about this fantasy kingdom, August decides to play into these and go along with these hallucinations to see if the process of going through the hallucinations will bring Jack out okay on the other side. The Legend of the Gold Raven is snippets of the story from Jack's perspective, so you get a little bit more of the elements of this fantasy kingdom in this one, because that is the reality that Jack is living in, because the hallucinations get progressively worse throughout the book. So you will have big sections of what Jack is seeing, which is these fantasy hallucinations. Now my least favorite part of The Wicker King was actually the fantasy elements. It's a very like old English, reminds me of like the Jabberwocky kind of style of writing throughout these fantasy portions, so I didn't love that too much. But my favorite element of The Wicker King is the relationship between the 2 boys, and we did get some of that from Jack's perspective and the way that Jack was regarding the situation with August, instead of in The Wicker King where you're just getting how August is regarding the situation with Jack, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. But overall I gave this 3 stars. I would say if you want to read this, maybe just skip the fantasy bits and just read the contemporary sections, but either way it is only like 40 pages, so if you do want to read it, it's not going to take too much of your time, and there are a couple of like real nice moments that I did enjoy. The next 2 books I read were the comics, and that was volume 5 and volume 6 of Rat Queens. So volume 5 is The Colossal Magic of Nothing and volume 6 is The Infernal Path. Rat Queens is an adult high fantasy comic series that follows a group of boozy battle maidens for hire, and after getting into one bar fight too many, they are thrown into jail, and to get free they have to perform quests for the realm. So a lot of the installments, like the volumes of this comic, are quite isolated. It's a swords and sorcery kind of thing, so it's a lot of isolated quests. My favorite element of this series is the characters and the relationships between them. There's a lot of representation and diversity in here, especially queer rep, and it's also really funny, which I love, and these two installments did not deviate from any of that. But what I will say is that I enjoyed them for different reasons. So I would definitely say, if you are going to be reading volume 5 of this, make sure that you know what happened in volume 3. Make sure that you have refreshed your memory on that, because elements of the overarching plot of the series were a lot more present in volume 5 than in volume 6, and it has been a long time since I read volume 3. I've been reading this series since 2019, maybe 18, and I keep leaving big gaps in between the volumes, so I was confused a lot about what happened in volume 5. But if I had remembered all of the specifics from volume 3, I think I would have adored this one, because I think it was really clever. And volume 6 was a little bit more isolated, but it was, as usual, really funny, and it had some really cool side characters that I really loved in this one as well. I gave both of these 4 stars. Still really recommend this series, and I'm hoping to continue very soon, because I think is volume 8 maybe the most recent one of these, so I'm almost up to date. It took me a while, but I'm nearly there. I then read a second novella, and that was Sight Witch by Susan Dennard. I will say that this one is a little bit more substantial, but I read this one because I am a co-host for Witchlands Along, which is a read-along of the Witchlands series created by Jade at JD Ray Reads, and we had a live show for this towards, I think it was the middle of June. Honestly, the whole of June is a big mess in my brain. I have no concept of when anything happened. But the Witchlands series as a whole starts off by following Safi, who is a truth witch, which means that she has the ability to tell when people are lying. So because of this, her powers are incredibly coveted, and she has kept them a secret her entire life. However, one day she crosses paths with a blood witch who has the ability to scent people's blood, discover what power they have, and then track them over vast distances. And when the blood witch scents Safi's blood, he then starts to hunt her down, which sends Safi on the run with her best friend Iseult, and they end up wrapped up in this political plotline that centers around a 20-year treaty between the nations that is soon to be coming to a close. So Sight Witch is the 2.5 installment. It follows Ryber, who is one of the characters we are introduced to in the first book, and it is a prequel story. It is also told, it has deckled edges, which I hate, and they also never made an edition that matches the UK hardbacks, but it is mixed media. It has a lot of mixed media elements throughout here, and I will say it is a relatively quick read. But this is split into 2 timelines. We have Ryber's timeline from a young girl growing up as a Sight Witch in the Sight Witch convent, and we have the perspective of somebody called Eurydice, who is one of the legendary figures in this world, who was also a Sight Witch. I think, was it like 1,000 years prior to the start of the story. I will say that I did enjoy this one, but I definitely enjoyed Eurydice's parts more than Ryber. I really enjoyed learning about the origins of some of the magical elements in this world, and I think it also gave us a lot of information that is going to relate to the current plot and where the characters are currently at. So I definitely enjoyed that about it. Ryber's perspective in here and her timeline I found got kind of stale for me around the halfway point, and I just wasn't really as interested in what she was doing throughout the latter half of the novel. But I did give this 4 stars, mainly for the information it contained, and the way that information is revealed in here is that it's kind of laid out there, but it's really not clear how it relates to the plot. So it gave us an opening for lots of interesting theories going forward into the series, and I'm really excited to see some of those theories, fingers crossed, come into fruition. I then finished my first full-length novel of the month, which I did actually start, I think, on like the 1st or 2nd of the month, but at the height of all of the Hamilton stuff happening, this was the book that I was currently reading. So the progress going through it was very slow, and after the first like 50 pages or so, my anxiety was incredibly high, so I did switch to the audiobook. And I'm not usually a big fan of audiobooks, especially fantasy. I only really listen to contemporary and thriller because I find it really hard to follow fantasy through. It's my own thing, I just don't retain information audibly very well. well, but I do definitely recommend the audiobook for these, and I really enjoyed the narrator. But that book was The Painted Man by Peter V. Brett. This is the first book in the Demon Cycle, and it is one of those like real, not necessarily hyped, but well-regarded adult fantasy series. So this one is a multi-perspective fantasy that is set in a world that is overrun by demons, and these demons come out at night. So the people of this world, they ward their houses. They have cities called free cities, which are a little bit safer. They have warded walls, but in normal villages and hamlets, people just ward their houses and nobody goes out at night. So we're following three main characters in here. We have Arlen, Leisha, and Roger. Leisha was definitely my favorite of the three, but Arlen is somebody who really wants to fight back against the monsters, but society has kind of just dealt with this problem by hiding from them. Leisha is training to be a healer, so she deals with like herb law and all of that kind of stuff. And Roger is training to be a jungler, which is essentially a fool. Way back in the history of this world, people did used to fight back against these monsters as well. However, it actually reminded me quite a bit of Final Fantasy X. If you guys have played that game, it's my favorite game of all time, where it seems like they had great technological advances and scientific advances, and they used these to hold back the demons. However, something happened, I think it was called the collapse, and they've now turned away from technology because it failed them the first time, and they think like that is like the reason why the demons have come back to plague them, and all of the ways that they used to fight back has essentially been lost. So this is set from the characters being a very young age. Roger is the youngest of them. I think Arlen is like the oldest, but it starts off with Arlen being about 6 years old, and it follows him into, I think it's like his mid-20s, and Leisha is just a little bit younger than him, and Roger is the youngest of the three. Now I will say that I did not really like how this book was structured in regards to those perspectives. I found it to be very disjointed because we had a good like 4 or 5 chapters at the beginning of this that followed Arlen, and then we skipped to 4 or 5 chapters that followed Leisha, and then we had one following Roger, and then we'd go back to Arlen for a little bit, and I just felt like I would have enjoyed this a little bit more if they were evenly spaced throughout, because I felt like by the time we introduced Roger, I was over 100 pages into the book, and I was like, I feel like this is kind of late to be introducing a character whose perspective I'm going to be following when he's not tied to the other perspectives, because that is another thing as well. These three characters start off isolated in very different places to each other. They don't know each other. They're not even remotely connected to each other. I will say that this book definitely picks up. I think it was around the 150 page mark, and I did get into it a lot more at that point. At the beginning I was struggling to understand everything, especially with these perspectives that just weren't connected at all. But through the middle portion I started to really enjoy it, and I did like the end, although not quite as much as this middle section. So I gave this 3 stars overall. I do want to continue with the series. I don't think that I really give this book a fair chance. I mean, I did, in terms of I didn't go into it expecting to dislike it or anything, and I did my best with this book, but the time that I read it was just not it. Like my focus was everywhere. I know that my attention could have been a lot better when I was reading this book, but it's just, it would have probably been fair not to read it, but as I said, to manage my anxiety I did need something, and this happened to be the book that I was reading, so it was the one that I listened to in audiobook. There's also a whole ton of sexism in here which I didn't like, and also content warnings for sexual assault, which I was really disappointed in. Not overly surprised from high fantasy from the early 2000s, to be honest, but it was just something I wasn't a fan of. And there were elements that I did like about this, like the way the character progression in terms of where they are at the end. I'm now intrigued going forward, but I do feel like this also felt like a really long prologue to get to this point, and I don't feel like the writing was particularly emotive. Like, I'm not particularly attached to any of these characters, although I did enjoy following them at least for most of the time that I was reading this. So yeah, like, don't take my opinion as law on this one. I do stand by my criticisms, like the negatives and positives that I found in this, but there is a chance I could have enjoyed it a lot more if my focus was there, and sadly it just was not. Then I read my favorite book of the month, which was Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hill. Hibbert. This is the second book in the Brown Sisters series, and it is an adult contemporary romance, like a rom-com style romance. So this one follows the middle Brown sister, which is Danny, who is a PhD student with commitment issues, and she asks the universe for a sign and also asks the universe for a fuck buddy. So the universe gives her Zafir, and Zafir is a friend of hers. He is also the security guard at the university where she works, and he adores romance and romance novels, and he's just searching for his happily ever after, while Danny is searching for a fuck buddy, and they both know this about each other. So while there is mutual attraction there, they don't really do anything about it. However, that is until there is a drill at the university where they both work, and Danny gets stuck in a lift. So Zaf rescues her and carries her out of the building real heroically, and they are caught on film by a ton of the students and end up going viral on Twitter under the hashtag Dr. Rugby. So Zaf asks Danny if she will help him take advantage of them going viral, as he has a non-profit organization where he coaches kids in rugby and also teaches them to embrace their emotions and deal with mental health issues. So Danny agrees, and they enter into a fake relationship to help Zaf's charity. So I gave this one 5 stars. I really loved it. I definitely have some, not necessarily negative points because I didn't mind them, but they are things to note. So I have obviously read the first book in this series, which is Get a Life, Chloe Brown, and I will say that they are not entirely different. I would say that the plot structure is pretty much the same. The writing style and tone is the same. I wouldn't say that the character of Danny feels especially different to the character of Chloe, but when I read Get a Life, Chloe Brown, I just wanted more of the same, and this gave me more of the same, because obviously, like, I didn't want any more from Chloe and Red, because for their story to continue it would have just been adding conflict for the sake of conflict, but I just wanted more of that, and this definitely delivered that for me. In terms of which one I prefer out of the two, I don't think I've decided yet, because I definitely prefer Zafir as a love interest to Red, but I think I might prefer Chloe to Danny as a character, but Chloe and Danny don't feel wholly different to me either. In the month of July, I am going to be reading Out Your Age, Eve Brown, so we'll see if that one turns out to be my favorite, because I know that Eve Brown is a lot of people's favorites, but I would still definitely recommend this series. Would say still that if you're a fan of the Georgia Nicholson series, the humor in this is like an adult version of that, which I truly appreciate, and I'm very surprised, very pleasantly surprised and thrilled by how much I love this series, and I'm definitely going to be reading some more like contemporary rom-com style books in the future, so let me know if you have any recommendations for those. I then read my e-arc, which was Nation of the Sun by H.R. Moore. This one has just been released. I think it was around the 20th of June, and it is the first book in a new adult indie paranormal series. So this one mainly focuses on the theme of reincarnation, which is something that I really loved about it, because it also ties into the idea of soulmates and having the same soulmate through every lifetime kind of situation, which is something that I love. I will say I mainly love it in concept, because I haven't read that many books that actually deal with it, but it is a topic that I'm interested in, and if I see it in a synopsis anywhere, I'm more likely to pick it up. But in this one, we are following Amari and Casper. Amari and Casper are both demons, and in this world, the demon nations are all split up. So the world is divided into all of these demon nations, and Amari and Casper are pagans. Every time a demon wakes up in a new lifetime, they need some time to awaken, which is essentially recovering their memories. So traditionally, Casper wakes up early, and then he has to go seek out his soulmate, which is Raina, and try and encourage her to wake up, because she always wakes up a little bit later. So in this lifetime, Raina has been born into the life of Amari. So Casper turns up when Amari is just about to get married and says that he's a government official and wants her help with something, which she's really confused about because she's a food critic, but eventually she starts to get like a weird kind of deja vu kind of vibe from Casper, so she goes along with it, and he tells her that she is a demon and she is his soulmate, and he is trying to get her to wake up along with the rest of the pagans, because there is a brewing conflict with the Templars, and through her past lifetime she has been one of the key people in the negotiations with the Templars. So I really like the theme of reincarnation and soulmates in this one, and I really enjoyed how it brought lots of like lore and ancient practices and ancient artifacts into the story, because the demons have lived for a very long time with all of the reincarnation, and they have these kind of like communal properties where they can store all of their past lost items so that when they wake up in a new life, they still have like a home and somewhere to go and all of their belongings from their past lives, and I really enjoyed those elements of it. I will say that this book did kind of feel like a really long prologue, because where the story left off, it seems like they're going into something as opposed to having a little bit of a conflict and resolution towards the end of the book to then go into the next one. So I would have just appreciated a little bit more of a climactic ending before we went into this kind of cliffhanger moment. I also think that at the moment there are a few too many characters in the main cast. I did do an interview with HR Moore not too long ago, which you can watch. I will link it up here for you guys, where she did say that the reason for all the characters is that they are going to play integral parts in the plot a little bit later on, but just through this first installment I did struggle to keep track of them all because there were quite a few within the main cast. I think there's about 6 or 7, maybe even 8 demons that are all seemingly prominent side characters. I don't think I would have minded as much as well if this book was a little bit longer. I don't know how much it is in its physical print, but I had it like my estimate was around 300 to 350 pages. So even though I thought that the pacing was fine, I feel like I would have appreciated a little bit more development and a little bit more time spent through here just to immerse me into the story a little bit more. I then finished up a couple of duologies. The first one was the Traitor Queen by Danielle L. Jensen. The duology is called The Bridge Kingdom. This is the sequel to The Bridge Kingdom, and this one is a new adult high fantasy romance. So the series structure for this series is that it's going to be 6 books overall, broken up into 3 duologies, and each duology is going to focus on a different couple. So the plot of this one is that we are following a young woman called Lara who has been raised in the desert with her sisters and trained to be an assassin. Her father has done this. Her father is the king, and he has sent all of his daughters to train to be assassins because there is a treaty with a neighboring kingdom, the Bridge Kingdom, where the main character's father is going to give one of his daughters to the king of the Bridge Kingdom to become his bride. So Lara's father has trained them all to be assassins so that when he sends one to be the Bridge King's bride, she can then assassinate him and her father can then gain control of the bridge, which is a very important trade route between all of the kingdoms in this world. So I thoroughly enjoyed both books in this series. I really love the romantic elements. It's not super heavy on the romance. There is like detail in the sexy scenes in here, but it is more of a slow burn than anything. Both of the books are. I really like the writing throughout both of them. I will say that it contains one of my pet peeves in fantasy, which is when scenes are skipped over. This one is dual perspective as well. You read from Lara's perspective and also Aaron, who is the king of the Bridge Kingdom, and it will do things like you'll be reading from Lara's perspective and Aaron will be doing something notable somewhere else, but instead of following him while he does it, you'll just kind of catch up with an aftermath. I will say though, even though that is one of my pet peeves, I do not think it necessarily detracts from this book. I think that Danielle L. Jensen figured out a really clever way to do it because the pacing throughout this book and the duology as a whole overall is very slow, and normally my criticism with this is that by skipping things and taking away things like travel scenes, you lose a lot of character development and also building attachment with the characters because you cut out all of the slow moments where you're just kind of bonding with them, and I definitely don't think that this series suffers from that at all. I will say that the ending of it was a little bit too fast paced in that as we were coming up to the climax and all of the action scenes, it kind of cut out a lot of the recuperation scenes, which I would have appreciated just to like kind of bring the energy and pace of the book up and then lower it back down a little bit, then bring it back up while it's building to the conclusion. But overall, I gave this book 4 stars. Would definitely recommend this as a fantasy romance series, and writing style and tone wise, even kind of romance wise, I think it is very reminiscent of things like Throne of Glass. So if you are a fan of Throne of Glass or even ACOTAR, then I would definitely recommend giving this one a try. It is indie as well, and as you know on this channel we love to support indie fanro authors. And the final book I read in the month of June is The Faithless Hawk by Margaret Owen. This one is the sequel to The Merciful Crow, which was a book that I read back in 2019 and thoroughly enjoyed, but then just never picked up the sequel even though I pre-ordered it. So this one is a young adult fantasy duology and it follows a young girl called Fi who is a crow. Now this world is split into a caste system. All of them are named after birds, and you have the crows at the bottom and the phoenixes at the top. So the phoenixes are the royalty of the world, and every caste has a bird birthright, which is a magical ability tied to their cast. The phoenixes have fire, the peacocks have illusion magic, the owls have really good memories and things like that. So every cast has a birthright aside from the crows. However, if they touch the bones of a member of another cast, they can use those bones to harness the ability of that cast. So the crows also actually perform an essential task in this world because the world suffers from something called the Sinner's Plague, and the crows are immune to it. So they perform the task of going into the cities and villages, dealing mercy to the victims of the plague, removing the bodies and burning them to stop the contamination spreading. And for their services, they are paid in teeth, which are made of bone and allows them to harness the birthrights of the other casts. So this story starts off where the leader of Fire's Crow Band has agreed to remove the bodies of the prince and his bodyguard as they have died of the plague. However, when they are transporting the bodies out of the palace, they realize that the prince and his bodyguard are actually not dead, but the prince's stepmother is trying to kill him and take over the throne. So they struck up a deal with the crows to be smuggled from the palace and given protection until they can get to some allies who will help them fight back against this evil stepmother figure. So I actually really like this duology. I think it has a very unique world, and I think that the world building is very good and very detailed considering the length of these books. They're both, I think, under 400 pages each, but I think that the world building and the atmosphere is built really well in here. We have a lot of complexity within the world and the politics and the magic without it being incredibly dense. And Margaret Owen has a unique kind of writing style throughout this duology that is very distinctive and that I personally really like. I remember when The Merciful Crow was released, a lot of people didn't like this book because of the writing style, but I personally really enjoy it. So this book in particular, I also enjoyed. I gave it 4 stars. I will say that if you are thinking of reading this, it does carry on directly from the end of The Merciful Crow. I had to read a recap to refresh myself, but it may be a good idea if you would like to reread The Merciful Crow before going into this, just so that you are up to date on all of the intricacies of the plot, the magic and the world, etc. But I will also say that Margaret Owen does a pretty good job of recapping throughout the beginning of this if it has been a while since you've read the first book. There are a lot of elements of the plot in this one that I really liked. It had the trope of kind of going undercover in a palace, or like a person who shouldn't be at the palace acclimatizing to court life that you see in like the Throne of Glass series. And it also reminded me a lot of Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard, which is one of my favorite series. As well as all of that palace stuff, we also had a spy network which reminded me a lot of Farley in Red Queen. There is a romance in this series. I will say it plays like a decent part of the plot, but it's not like the focus of the story, and I actually really enjoy it. I like both of the characters involved. I like the dynamic. I was very scared about going into it with it being called The Faithless Hawk. If you know, you know, essentially. And I will say that because of the title of this book, I feel like it definitely alludes to something. Everything to do with that plot line of this, to do with the title of this book, I predicted from the outset. Maybe not the direct circumstances of how it begins, but the wrap-up point of it, I definitely predicted. And I will say that it has a little bit of info dumping in here and like lazy plot reveals, because I don't mind an info dump if it's at the beginning of a story to tell you about like the world, the magic, the politics. Like if you want to dump all that in the first 3 chapters, I won't mind it, because I'll be going forward into the story with all of the knowledge I need. But I really hate it when it's in plot reveals, and this had a couple of those lazy elements in the reveals towards the end of the book and the series. But overall, I really enjoyed it. Gave it 4 stars. Both books in this series I gave 4 stars, and I would definitely recommend this if you're looking for a new YA fantasy to pick up. So aside from those 9 books, I have started another one. I'm filming this video a little bit early just because I know I'm not going to finish the book that I've started, but I have also started Blood Witch by Susan Dennard, once again for Witch Lands Along. A few people asked me why it isn't in my July TBR. It's because I have started it with 3 days of the month left. I am currently on page 42, so I don't think I'm going to finish it by the end of the month, which is why I'm making this video. But that is why it isn't on my July TBR, because I'm reading it in June and I anticipate being at least like a good 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through by the end of the month. So that is it. Those are all of the books that I read in the month of June. For the month of July, I have a little bit of an ambitious TBR. Page count is not incredibly high considering my usual amount that I read, but I am aiming to read around 11 books, and unlike this month, they are all going to be at least standard size novels, with a few of them a little bigger. So fingers crossed July is a more productive reading month for me. I really feel like I want to read at the minute. It's just settling myself down and being in the mindset to actually concentrate and read some books, but I hope I can do it in July because I really wanna. Down in my comments, please let me know if you read any of these books and what you thought of them, whether you agree with my opinions or you disagree, and also let me know what your favorite book of June was. But aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head to my description box, you will find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish Candle website, the Instagram for that, and 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you're go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.